screw you, I'm going to have 5, right? I have 5. Now we always say we wish we would have done 6 or 7, but all that aside, so now that we just talked about that, let's talk about who had a vested interest in the system we're dealing with now. Who had an interest in telling all the women to do this? Like, that didn't come out of thin air. It didn't just start for no reason. So if you go back to the 1800s in America and England, and you have the Industrial Revolution has just popped off, and you've got these factories springing up, and we're switching over from monarchies to nation states. We're switching over from agrarian lifestyles to more industrialized society. So everyone's moving out of the country and they're moving into these urban centers to work in factories. Well, the wealthy industrialists who own all these factories need cheap labor, and they need a lot of it, and they need it fast. And so here in the United States, they couldn't import enough immigrants fast enough. Like, they did get quite a few here, but it just wasn't enough. And so a lot of these wealthy industrialists, like Cornelius Vanderbilt, okay, the Vanderbilt family, they need a lot of cheap labor. And so we're talking late 1800s, 1860s, 70s. Cornelius Vanderbilt hooks up with this woman named Victoria Woodhull, who was actually the first woman who ever ran for president. And she was on a ticket with, oh gosh, his name's escaping me, the freed slave that everybody knows who ran for president. They weren't serious.
Douglas?
Nobody really voted for. Yes, Douglas. Yes, she was on a ticket with him. It was like a freedom party or something, because they were both free love advocates, and they were both up to, they knew how to party, let me tell you. They were up to some shenanigans too. But
if I was a freed slave, that's all I would do is party.
That's what he did. And he liked the white ladies, I'll tell you that too.
God, I've never heard that before.
He was friends with Victoria Woodhull, who she and her sister were snake oil salesmen, like literal snake oil salesmen. They got this business from their father. They would go around the country selling fake cancer cures, fake medicines. They would scam people. They were wanted in multiple states for scamming people. Like, a lot of people died because these women sold them like phony baloney cures to different diseases.
Unbelievable.
And she said that she had a dream. Now, this is something in the middle 1800s. You'll hear a lot of the feminists say that they were possessed by spirits, that they had ghosts of ancient people who possessed them and told them to do things. They would say they were automatic writers, fortune tellers, clairvoyants, things like this. Part of it is there was a big spiritualism thing happening in the United States at that time. But the other reason is they could get away with a lot of behavior under that guise that they couldn't get away with otherwise, right? If you said that the spirit of Demosthenes possessed you and told you to go to New York and meet Cornelius Vanderbilt and help him game the stock market, you could kind of get away with some of that craziness a little easier. That's exactly what she did. She and her sister went to New York. They met up with Cornelius Vanderbilt, who had a lot of stock in the stock market. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country at the time. And during the black market crash of 1869, I think it was, she helped him game the stock market. He knew exactly what to do, what things to pull out of the day before this crash happened, and he made $26 million in their money. So converted to today's dollars, he made $26 million. And all the newspapers came and asked him, wow, you're the only person who didn't get absolutely, didn't lose their ass in this first huge stock market crash. How did you do it? How did you know what to do? And he said, do as I do, consult the spirits. So he said she was a fortune teller and that she contacted the spirits and they told her what to do. Well, that's not true. What really happened is this lying-ass bitch, she had a prostitution ring. She was a madam. She had a bunch of prostitutes in New York City that slept with a lot of the Wall Street bankers and the Wall Street traders and would spy on them and collect intelligence and give it back to her. And then she would report it to Vanderbilt. Whoa. So he got insider trading tips from this prostitution ring that this woman was running. And of course, she did this all under the guise of free love, which she said the spirits told her to promote free love, promiscuity, open marriage. Sound familiar? Sound anything like today?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how he gamed the stock market. And when he made that 26 million, he gave a good bit of it to Victoria and her sister. And they did two things with that money. One is they started the first female-owned stock brokerage trading firm on Wall Street. The other thing they did was start one of the nation's first socialist newspapers, and she published the Communist Manifesto in English for the first time. Thanks, Victoria Woodhull. So yeah,
that's crazy. That's so crazy how the same story just gets used over and over and over again. And you know what's so nuts about that is like that story is very similar to Watergate. And like the story that we're told is like, this guy broke in and the security guard found him and all this stuff. Like, oh my God. And like in reality, it was a bunch of dudes were spilling the beans to hookers. And and that's what really Watergate was about. The story of the show.
Yeah, so this happened in 1869 as well. It really is the same. I mean, you just notice these patterns right throughout history of the same kind of things happening over and over again. My personal belief is it's the same spirits behind it. And we can talk about that. But I have another story that's just like this. So if you're wondering, how the hell did they pass suffrage if nobody wanted it? If women were like, wanted nothing to do with it, which they didn't. They were like, if you go back and check, anti-suffrage groups had far higher membership among women than pro-suffrage groups. Like I said, it was wildly unpopular with women. Women wanted nothing to do with women's liberation. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton says herself in her memoirs that it wasn't because she said the reason we can't get women on board is not because, they're oppressed and they love their slavery. It's because they have everything they want. If they want to work, they can. If they want to go to university, and they can. But most of them just want to raise their kids together. They want to have community. They want to have their sewing circles, and they want to plan community events and run the churches. And they have a lot of influence already. They had women's groups that had a lot of political influence without them being a voting bloc. And those women who were against suffrage said, look, we don't want to just be another voting bloc because right now we're apolitical, and that gives us this moral high ground. So if we ask for clean milk, safe parks, more schools, and we go to legislators with this, they tend to listen to us because we're not just another lobbying group, and we don't want to lose that moral high ground that we have. And they had many other really good reasons. They didn't want to get drafted into the military. They were like, look, if we're equal with men, where's our argument to not be in the draft? We don't want to have to do jury duty. We don't want to have to do all of the difficult, dirty, dangerous things that men have to do, right? We've got our own sphere of influence, and we've got our own things we're concerned with. We don't want this. And the reason it was forced through, again, was through some really wealthy industrialists in the progressive era. Now I'm going to name some names. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. So we have the Vanderbilt family and the Belmont family. How'd she do this? Well, Alva was, she married Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandson. So the same guy who gamed the stock market, his grandson, William K. Vanderbilt, married Alva when she was young. And they got divorced. She was granted one of the first divorces, and it was on grounds of adultery. He was a bit of a philanderer. So she was granted a divorce and got a lot of his huge, like, golden era mansions that had all the marble. If you've seen all those really fancy progressive era mansions, she inherited a bunch of properties and one of the biggest divorce settlements in all of history at that time. And she married his best friend, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont.
Scandalous.
And Belmont was a Rothschild banker. So he actually was sent to Europe to learn the Rothschild banking system and how they do their accounting and their central banking practices. And so he was a really wealthy guy too. And she married him, and then he got very sick and died. So she had this double windfall of these two huge fortunes. She was one of the wealthiest women on planet Earth. And she was kind of a man hater. She wasn't exactly fond of men, and she thought, I'm going to dedicate all of my fortunes to helping this suffrage cause and this women's liberation movement. So you guys might know that a lot of the suffragists were kind of terrorists. They would do mail bombings, firebomb businesses.
I never knew that. Do you know that? There was a bunch of feminist terrorists out there? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Here and in England, the Pankhurst family in England, and then a lot of the suffragists here, they would put bombs in the mail. They would bomb businesses. They would smash storefront windows in protest, and they would get taken to jail. And the feminists will tell you, oh, they all went on hunger strikes and they really suffered for the cause. It's not really true. It's kind of bullshit, because the men who had to arrest these women and take them to prison were kind of like, ugh, just women problems, right? These women are probably, it's their monthly and they're angry, and so they're bombing things. So they would arrest, they didn't want to, but they would arrest them, and then they'd get bailed out all the time, like hundreds of them. By the hundreds, they'd get bailed out all the time. Well, it was because Alva Belmont and a lot of these other wealthy people who backed suffrage would bail them out. So they'd say, go ahead and do the terrorist act. You're going to get arrested. It's fine. We'll just bail you out and you'll be back out in a couple of days.
And that just happened too. That just happened with Antifa.
Just like with Antifa.
And BLM and all these Hollywood jackasses. Bail. You remember when like Patton Oswalt and what's his face from The Office? What's the lead guy?
Steve Carell.
Steve Carell and Seth Rogen were just like bragging about all the people they were bailing out. I'm like, what are you doing?
No, I don't remember that actually. Yeah. They were bailing people out of jail.
Yeah, they were yelling, bail. I got it, bail. They were just tweeting about it left and right. And real quick before we move on is that, you know, when you talk about like the problem with suffrage is that everyone was happy. That was a big part when communism tried to come to America. And they were like, oh, dude, it's hard to get these workers motivated because they're all really happy with their jobs and how it's going. They're like, we have to be submersive here, and we have to be subversive. That's the word, to get this done, because they're actually enjoying their lives and they're happy with what's going on.
Oh, yeah, because remember that this suffrage stuff is going on prior to the income tax, prior to the Federal Reserve Act. We're in an area of American history where you do have a free market to a large degree. You only have localized banks. You have a lot of capital. You have cheap land. You have money that's actually worth something. So yes, it was very hard to convince women that they needed to go to work. They were like, what? What are you talking about? Why would I want to go work in a gross factory all day when I can stay in my nice house and have this great standard of living, and just my husband goes and works and I hang out with my sisters and my cousins and my friends and we raise our kids to get like, they were like, what are you talking about? There was not this great motivation in women like, we want careers and we want to go work in the factory. They didn't want that to an extremely large degree. The question, if women didn't want this, how did it get passed, and why were these wealthy people backing it? You know, like it doesn't seem obvious why these wealthy industrialists wanted this. Well, one obvious reason is they wanted more cheap labor, right? And if you can convince women to go work in factories doing you put the screw in the pack 1,000 times a day, or you pull the lever 1,000 times a day, or you take this thing off of this and you put it over here. If you could get women to do this like low skilled, cheap labor, then you double the labor supply overnight, and you don't have to import a bunch of immigrants or any of that. So that's one obvious reason, but there's two bigger reasons. And so we just talked about Alva Vanderbilt Belmont and how she had married William K. Vanderbilt, who was one of the founding members of a little club you guys probably know about called the Jekyll Island Club.
We've heard of them.
Who met in secret to draft the Federal Reserve Act and create the Federal Reserve banking system. They secretly snuck off under the guise of, we're going on a duck hunting trip, right? And they snuck off to Jekyll Island for 10 days and locked themselves in a room because they knew that if the media caught wind of what they were doing, it would never pass and they would never get it through Congress. So this was all very hush-hush and very sneaky. He was one of the big architects of this, along with J.P. Morgan and a few of the other really wealthy industrialist banker types. Same thing with Belmont. Her second husband was also completely wrapped up in this. So she had all this inside info, once again, in the banking elite families that were going to institute this Federal Reserve central banking system, and we're going to institute an income tax. So if you're going to do that, would you want to just tax one income per family, or would you want to be able to tax two incomes per family? And would you want people who, now you've got a two-income economy, You can't just support a family on one income anymore. So everybody is in this debt-based economy where you're perpetually in debt with your mortgage, you're perpetually in debt with your credit cards. You have to get college loans to go to college. It's a completely debt-based economy that wouldn't exist if we hadn't pushed women into it. If only men were working and going to university and doing all this stuff and getting loans, it wouldn't have done for them what this did. Because women own 80% of consumer debt now, I think it is. It's like insane. God. So, of course, these people had this vested interest in getting women out of the home and into jobs, into factories at the time, but really any kind of industry. And the other big reason that they wanted this is because all these folks were eugenicists. The Rockefeller family, the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the Fords, all into eugenics. It was very popular at the time, around the turn of the century. They wanted birth control. They wanted smaller family sizes. They wanted to depopulate. So if women are all at home having babies all day, you're never going to have that. So you have to convince women that motherhood is oppressive and that it's dangerous and it's dirty. And we can get into Margaret Sanger and the Rockefellers and how